Hello, everyone. It's Jennie and Laurie of Astropath. Thanks for being here today. Before we get started into our topic of the day, please subscribe to our channel and follow us on our respective websites. Jennie is Jennie of hiddenpathastrology.com, and I am Laurie of astrolore.org. So follow us here, follow us everywhere. We're out there. So today, what are we talking about today, Jennie?
Oh my, we are talking about all planets being direct. This means that all planets are in direct motion. We have no retrogrades.
Yay!
And this period of time is lasting from January 23rd to April 21st this year.
Yes.
So yes,
That's
yay.
Yeah, that's a long period for all the planets to be direct at the same time. There's usually something in retrograde. So this is kind of a exciting thing to contemplate. And, neither one of us are really, I don't think either one of us are ready to make some definitive statement that this means this. What it means is that we're not looking in the rearview mirror. That's what I think of. It's just everything's kind of moving forward, and we can say yay, but that's not always great. Is of course the importance of looking in the rearview mirror and the importance of considering things from the past. So if it's good or not good, we are here mostly just to explore the topic.
Yeah, and just open a discussion. So, we're definitely inviting you to make comments about this video because we're curious to hear what you think. Because you could argue in all sorts of different directions, and you could do a lot of research to kind of dig in, which we have not done lots of research. We're just looking at some dates and maybe how it'll impact you personally. But it is interesting to note because basically there are periods, most years where all the planets are direct, but usually there's something retrograde. So these direct periods, as you mentioned, this one's about 90 days.
Yeah.
A lot of them are a lot shorter than that. There's some years was like 7 days,
Yeah.
There's even one year, I think it might even be 2013 or 14, where there wasn't any period where all the planets were in the direct motion. So just interesting to look at at this point of view. There's also people with charts where everything's direct, so it's interesting to look at it from that lens too. But I just wanted to mention too, what is a retrograde? Most of you probably know, but if you don't, it is not something that's happening in real time. Like planets are not actually traveling backwards to the sky. It's completely to do with our perspective on the planet Earth, that it looks like from where we are that things are traveling in a backward direction. So that's kind of what it means, just really in a very brief mention. Astrologically, it often means in a natal chart, those of us with retrograde planets, it often indicates a little bit of an outlier, or something that has to think or do something differently than what the popular culture suggests.
Right.
So kind of a wild child, and it can be used very usefully to think outside the box compared to the rest of the culture. So yeah, do you have other thoughts about retrograde or what it means even in mundane sense? Or
well, retrogrades are times where we have to rethink what's going on in that area of our lives. When Mercury is retrograde, we always want to know what house it's in, because that'll give us some information about what we need to be rethinking and reworking on. With any of the planets, that's the main thing is find out where it is and re-navigate that area in the manner of the planet involved. People who are born with no planets retrograde, I think it's important to, think about how long after you were born planets start going retrograde, because that will impact the progressed charts. But I think that people who are born with no retrogrades, there is more of a flow, or that's kind of tricky. And I had intended to find some examples and completely spaced doing that. But I know that there were no planets retrograde when I was born, and I've always given that a little bit of credit for why I'm still standing. So, and
Yeah.
none went retrograde shortly after I was born as well. So I feel like that's a good thing, but it's really important, I think, for anyone really working with astrology to be really careful about this is good and this is bad. The whole idea of all the planets are moving direct. Oh, yay, that's great. Well, I don't necessarily want to hold that as a direct thing. It's always good when all the planets are moving direct, because there is the importance of, like I said before, looking in the rear view mirror. So we want to be careful of that. It reminds me of how people always think of a Jupiter transit as always being good. Well, not always, because there are times when expanding too much can be a problem. And there are times when moving forward, we might want to slow down and look in the rear view mirror.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really important. And I think you have some examples over the last few years of things that happened during these times that will illustrate that as well.
Yeah, it was interesting just kind of looking at the dates and then just looking at some historical events over just the last couple of years since 2020. It was interesting. I like what you said about just not kind of deciding something's good or bad, because I think if you think of, as you all say, Laurie, the planets are reflecting our story here on Earth. There's some things that we want to move forwards that are good and that are good for us, that are good for humanity continuing, right? And then there's other things that are like not great. Like I don't think anybody wants to see endless war, for example. So
Right.
and I think that the retrograde planets, what is cool about the different retrograde periods is it gives you a moment to pause and to do a little retreat. And we definitely live in a culture that thinks you just need to go full bore ahead and everything's external and don't bother reflecting. I mean, that's the status quo. That is not individual people's lives, but that is kind of the message a lot of us get. So anyway, so it was interesting looking at these periods. I'll start with last year, 2022, between February 3rd and April 29th. So very similar to what we have this year. There were a lot of things that moved forwards that hadn't been able to for a while. So for example, in that period, the Olympics happened again, like after they hadn't really happened for a while. Queen Elizabeth II celebrated 70 years on the throne, which is a record breaker. So that's kind of like, okay, the monarchy's still going, carrying on forwards, Something else to note is that's when the Ukraine war started and really started picking up, was in that period. And that was the thing that really dominated the news a lot in 2022. So it just in 2022's case, it's a lot of things that move forwards that, in my opinion, were not awesome. Like Brittany Griner was detained. The Taliban decided they were not going to allow girls in school anymore.
Moving forward with their plans, right?
Exactly, like just moving forwards in this way that doesn't. That is frustrating. And then, I mean, continued things with COVID. It's when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, which I saw as kind of like just a continuation of like aggro male bullshit, So it was interesting. Oh, and it's also when Twitter announced that Musk was going to buy it. It didn't happen yet. There was lots of complications, but there was just a little snapshot of these are a few things that woof kind of picked up speed during that time period. So that was 2022. In sort of an interesting contrast, 2021, there was one little week period that all the planets were direct in January. That's when Biden was inaugurated, right in that week. And then there was a second period, February 20th through April 27th. And then those kind of some funny things, like that's when that big ship ran aground in the Panama Canal and stopped.
It wasn't moving forward.
Yeah, so this is this opposite feeling. And on a good note, that Chauvin was convicted of George Floyd's death in that time period too. There were some shenanigans later with that trial, but just to give you like hey, here's a different tale about 2021 about these periods. So I just think it was I don't know, it's just interesting to think about it. And I'd love if somebody wants to geek out on this topic and do some more research, that would be really cool. On that note, I do want to give a shout out to allplanetsdirect.com, where the person who has authored that, Wave Rain, has a website with more
Yes.
stuff about this topic.
Yeah.
So check that out.
Yeah, she's really made this topic a really big, important part of her work. I think she's the first person who really started talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and she seems to look at it from a real global kind of spiritual perspective. So I'll leave that to folks to explore that on their own, because but she's got some cool data on there and an explanation of retrograde as well. So yeah. But in the meantime, we want to talk about how this impacts you. So
yeah, I think to me, all of these changes and these things that are going on in mundane astrology up there with the movement of the planets, where it really matters is how it impacts us personally. We can look at the impact on the politics or the planet, but really all of us are most interested in ourselves, I think, and our family members, etc. So what I really want to talk about is the most significant, real personal planet that we've been dealing with for some months now has been Mars in its retrograde. So now that they're all moving forward, let's look at our charts. And we're going to start out, of course, looking at those of you who have Aries rising. So that Mars retrograde happened in your third house. And we did talk about that some when we talked about Mars retrograde. But now that everything's moved forward, the story that you've been telling yourself, that you've been rewriting around communication, this is moving forward. And it's going to, during all these planets direct, it's going to be moving through the rest of your third house and well into your fourth house. So, okay, I'm being distracted by.
I'll pick up the.
Pick it up, because my cat's ball is just stuck under. Automatic rolling thing. I got to pay attention to. Okay. Sorry, Jennie.
Well, we're saying that Mars, I mean, the central story here for those of you with Aries rising is that whatever work you've been doing around your communication, which I might add, might have to do with a sibling, might have to do with a close friend. It might have to do with a neighbor. Those are other significations of the third house. Whatever work you've been doing to work on your communication, to kind of dig out the thing that isn't maybe working so well for you, that might be subconscious or whatever. Now let's move forwards, and it's going to impact your family. So if you've done the work, and Mars is going into that fourth house, it's going to show up in the way that you have this new kind of ability to communicate with your family. So that's the first part of this. The second thing that we did here is we added the 2 places that Mars rules in your chart. So Mars rules Aries and Mars rules Scorpio. And so that we're also looking at that as kind of a subset of the central story or the central topic for you, Aries rising, communication and moving into the house of family. Now we're drawing in those 2 rulerships. So what do you think of that, Laurie?
Well, I think, the story that you've been really learning to understand over these past few months, you've been really learning to understand something regarding your communication or those types of relationships, like you said, neighbors, siblings, etc. So as you are taking that new story into your home and family, what's changing is how you show up, your personality, and how you navigate the values of others, because those are the areas that Mars is impacting other than where it is. So you've told yourself a new story, you're bringing that new story to your family, you have a new way of navigating other people's boundaries, and you have a new way of showing up. It's really as simple as that.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because that kind of speaks a little bit of like, this is, when you walk into a room, the image you project is that Aries, like, I'm ready to move things forwards, like, I'm not messing around, like, let's go. But it's funny because also having Mars in charge of your 8th house, it adds in, there's this subcontext of there's these layers of like the way you show up in the room, either sort of triggering people on a deeper level and they don't even maybe know it, and maybe provoking some aggression. Or on the other hand, like people go, wow, I really like this person. Like I really like, my values are in line with what this person who walked in the room is kind of suggesting. So it's kind of it kind of gives you this very outward look and then this more inner look of different topics in your life.
It suggests to me that you've really learned a lot over the last few months about how you do show up in navigating other people's values, or, when you are encountering someone whose values are different than yours, maybe you've learned to kind of settle down some of that aggression with Mars.
I like that.
That's interesting.
The only other thing I would add is just simply those of you Aries rising, if you know your chart, take a look, see where your own Mars is. That's going to give you some more information. And then write us a note.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything. We would love to hear from all of you. So we're going to move on to those of you who have Taurus rising. Okay. And if you've got Taurus rising, so the story that you've been renegotiating in your own mind through this time of Mars retrograde that we are done with now has been around your own values, possibly around money, resources, how you manage those things. You've probably learned a great deal about your values over this period of time, and that Mars, now that everything's moving direct, you can really start working with what you've learned. You can bring your new understanding of your values with you into communication. This work that you've been doing and continue to do as it moves into your third house is really supported by and ultimately changes how you relate to others and your own patterns of your unconscious.
Nice. Yeah, I really like this. Like that second house, just to reiterate some of the things you're saying, Laurie, like that second house is so much about your own values and your own resources, and in some ways your own energy reserves. So it's kind of like looking at what, have you had to rework around that? What maybe was drawing your energy down that has now been released so that you can move forwards and reassess how you value yourself, and then take action based on that new reassessment. And as you do that, you're really going to see in the way that you communicate that you're showing up with this with more confidence. And if you've done that work, if you've really rewritten that narrative, so that's what you should see, and then as you're saying, like the fruits of your labors may well be revealed in how your partnerships respond to this new confidence and like energy that you're bringing to everything. And the fact that if you also take that and incorporate it into spiritual practice where you're really grappling with your own deep patterns and you have a regular way of dealing with that, then you're just moving into a whole new phase. So yeah.
I feel like it's so important. I really like, now that Mars is moving direct with all the support of all the other direct motion planets, it just really pushes that. And, as Mars moves out of Gemini and into Cancer, you can see how that new story that you've learned about your own resources and your own self-worth, how bringing that into a kinder manner, Cancer, when it moves into that third house, how that will support your relationships and your deep understanding of yourself. That's beautiful. I like that.
And also just, Taurus rising, take a look at your own Mars in your natal chart. That'll help give you a little more information and maybe stir up some questions. So send us some questions.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so now let's move on to those of you with Gemini rising. So while Mars was retrograde from the end of October until whatever, last week or so, that Mars has been moving through your first house. The retrograde was in your first house. So it's really about really changing your narrative about who you are and how you show up in the world as a personality. Right, Jennie?
Yeah. Yeah. The first house pertains to yourself, but it's sort of like your image that you put out into the world. It's not, it's not your core identity. It's more like what you project out,
Right.
and refers to your self-development,
Yeah.
the sort of steps that you take in order to move through the different stages of identity, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and also the first house, it's the most powerful house. So it's kind of like, I love in some of the older astrology where if you think of your chart as like a ship, the first house is the helm, it's the direction
Ah,
that the ship is going in. So a
right.
Gemini rising person, it's all about communication. It's about disseminating information one way or another. Either as a storyteller or a teacher or,
Yeah.
or a networker or one of those other archetypes. But that's where a lot of this work is happening. And as you've kind of
Yeah.
renegotiated
Change
that,
that.
yeah, like that vibe or that part of yourself, now it's going to kind of solidify into a deeper level of how you value yourself and like
Yes.
your
Yeah.
self-worth. Now we're moving into another layer of
Right.
identity, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's what brings to mind into mind for me. So
Yeah, it's really solidifying the new story you're telling yourself about who you are and how you show up in the world. It's really solidifying that into your ability to value yourself. And that ultimately changes, your routines, how you take care of yourself,
yeah,
and how you receive and allow others to take care of you also.
yeah. Yeah, so these are the two areas that are ruled by Mars. And one of the things I love about, well, we made a video about the ancient rulerships, but I love the Aries and Scorpio rulership of Mars. Is that what it does? Is it shows you a more kind of extroverted outward version of Mars and a more
Mm,
inward facing. I
yeah.
think one thing I heard was like Aries is the warrior and Scorpio's the ninja, so like, but
Uh-huh.
they both
Uh,
have this kind of oomph that are associated with Mars. So as
yeah.
you, Gemini rising, have done this work, showing up in the first and second house there, as you said, Laurie, it's impacting your routines. It's like looking at like, what do you need to do about your healthcare routines? Like, are they too intense? Are they intense enough? I mean, these are the kind of questions, are you taking care of your fitness, your health, your nutrition well through those
Mm,
practices, and what do you
mhm.
need to maybe work with? And then the 11th house is just how you're showing up with groups,
Yeah.
and they tie together. I mean, in some ways, if you're looking at a recreational thing, it's like going out and playing sport with your friends, like the whole pickleball rage is happening, or I mean, it links those two topics together in some way, that is going to show what kind of work you've done on that Mars.
Yeah, yeah. So while all these planets are retrograde, watch these areas. Watch how your new story about yourself is supporting your values and how you manage your resources, and how all of that is showing up in your self-care and your community.
Nice.
Bottom line, that's about it. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Cancer rising. And this puts that Mars, the work that you've been doing, in your 12th house. I'm going to let you talk about this one, Jennie.
Okay, fine. So Mars is being in that 12th house. So this has been a real opportunity to kind of look a little bit within some of the depths, understand some of those subconscious, or even try to shine a light on those unconscious patterns that kind of trip you up. The 12th house refers to hidden enemies. It refers to self-undoing, among many other topics. So it's something to look at. If there's been a way in which you've been suffering and you're, I don't know, reworking your relationship to suffering somehow
Mm,
too, that could
mhm,
be a thing. But
mm.
this is some way that you've been rewriting a narrative here. And now it's going to go into your first house. So this is a big jump. This is, Mars motion, action, energy that's been very much behind the scenes. And it's now suddenly going to jump into that first house, where it's going to be much more visible and much more active. So it is an interesting, it's where you're really going to put those things that you discovered about yourself. Maybe some of them weren't
Right.
very pleasant,
Yeah.
but it's going to help you to clear them so you can move forwards in
Yeah.
this more
Yeah.
positive dynamic way. And that's what I think it symbolizes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah, you've been doing all this internal work and rewriting, trying to rewire some of those internal wiring patterns.
Yeah.
And when Mars does move into Cancer, it's going to bring that new understanding that's behind the scenes. It's going to bring that out into the open and really, your personality is going to wake up, I think, at that point, with all the planets direct at the same time. That feels really good to me. And
Yeah.
the result of that, I think, is going to show up in the areas that Mars rules. So your creativity can really wake up through this process, because some of that work you've done behind the scenes is opening up your awareness of what creativity means to you, maybe, and how maybe your creativity can support your career as well.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I was just thinking like Mars is moving from a very invisible place to a very
Yeah.
visible place.
Yeah.
So if you've been working on something where you feel like you are invisible, like you're just not being seen for some reason, that's going to switch.
Yeah.
That is going to switch. So that is something that so you made me kind of think of that. But yeah, and this
Yeah.
tying together, this is to do with your professional life, how you show up as a Mars person in your professional life, somebody who takes
Right.
action, who moves things forwards, who can have an impact, and what's tied into that is that fifth house, which, as you mentioned, in creativity, and it's that thing that you will do for the love of doing it. And when you marry these two places of your life together, you really have something, and you move it along with
Yeah.
that very forward motion of Mars moving into the first house, like, you're going to see some results. And that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Absolutely. And any of you with Cancer rising, you've got the cardinal planets on the angles, and that is a lot of direct motion. And I think this period of time when Mars does get into Cancer is really going to be a powerful time for you, for sure. Okay. Anything else?
Nope. Let's carry on.
All right, carry on. We're going to
Carrying on.
go on to those of you with Leo rising. So the work that you've been doing, Leo rising, during the period of time that Mars was retrograde was really rewriting the story of how you are in community, what community means to you. So you've been really working on that. And during the course of all of these planets being direct, that Mars will move into Cancer and into your 12th house. So you're going to bring what you've learned about community into an how are you thinking about that? I'm thinking about it as a real kind of a spiritual direction.
Yeah, well, I was interesting. Well, as you say that, what I'm thinking is like this could be you've recreated or become part of a new community or restructure what you're in or whatever, and it's going to take it to a deeper level. So maybe from that you might find
Right.
your sadhana community, which is like maybe a smaller group, or where you're really working with those profound, more spiritual issues. And a sadhana group is a lot different than a very outward community oriented feel. The sadhana group is a much more internal, like being willing to reveal more vulnerable, mystical kind of places with a group. So that it's really interesting. But I keep thinking about with the Mars movement, whoever you are, you're either moving from a yang house where you've had to do a lot of rumination, internal, work around how you appear outwardly, and then moving into a yin, like a quiet internal place. I mean, or you're doing the opposite depending on what your rising sign is.
Right.
So here, yes, I think it's fascinating to be like, you've restructured your community, and then now you're going to go into the, I don't know, the deeper corners with a little part of it or something.
Yeah, you're going to take what you have understood, what you have learned. It's interesting. I'm thinking just in terms of community as where we receive. How Noel Till always talked about the fifth house as where you give love and the 11th where you receive love. And you can think about, okay, you've been really learning about how you receive love from others and taking that understanding and bringing it into allow that love from others to support the internal growth of your spiritual understanding.
Yeah, it's like
It's
carrying
interesting.
something. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way how you just put it, Lori. I think it's like carrying that, because the 12th house ultimately is an alone place, is there's an
Right.
isolation there. So
Yeah.
it's like carrying that with you in order to know that you're still loved, even in
Yeah.
these alone places, which is really helpful.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's what it feels like to me, is you've learned that you can be supported by community. And in
Mhm.
understanding that you can be supported, you can go off and be by yourself
Yeah.
and take that
Absolutely.
with you. I love that.
Yeah.
And then how are we going to relate that to the ultimate result of this process being the home and the worldview?
Yeah. Very
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, I mean, the fourth house there where Scorpio is that Mars rules, I mean, that's, I mean, it's home, it can be family, it can be lineage, it can also be your internal personality structure where you kind of have your own foundation that you've worked with. So it's like the integrated personality in a psychological sense. So it's something about some of the results maybe feeling more at home with your deep
Yeah.
mystical self, and kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
embracing like this is who I am, and I'm just gonna move forward with it now. And
Right.
in doing that, you're also activating that where the Aries rulership in the ninth house. So this is, how you are sharing your wisdom.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
going, okay, I'm this deep, maybe there's an introverted part, which is interesting. And now it's going to show up in this much more external way, as maybe as a teacher,
Mhm.
or a way that you're expanding a worldview to really, I don't know, get a lot broader.
Yeah, that movement, all the planets moving direct and Mars moving direct and bringing that love of the community into deep internal places, allowing your understanding of home and family and worldview and how those two are connected and linked.
Hmm.
That's interesting. I mean, we learn so much about our worldview from our home and family in early life,
Yeah.
although it can change over time, certainly.
Yeah.
But there's that.
Yeah.
That's really,
Interesting.
it's interesting to think about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything more?
Um, no, I think I would just carry on. So
Okay. Then we're going to move on to those of you with, if I can get this to move, Virgo rising. So if you've got Virgo rising, you've been probably rewriting the story of your career, how you show up out in the world, what your vocation is, or how you manage it. There's been some dissatisfaction and working on changing that area of your life. And
Mhm.
over the coming months, while all these planets are in their forward motion, that the new story that you have started really engaging is going to be able to be brought to your community.
Nice. Yeah, this one seems kind of straightforward to me
Yeah.
of like the work that you've done in your career is now going to reach a broader audience.
Yeah.
It's going to reach out to those groups. It's going to impact the community. You're going to see perhaps a different level of, I guess, sort of like reward for your work, like that more people are going to see it in a different way, and not just the people in your workplace, but the
Right.
broader, other
Right.
companies, the community, groups of friends, so on and so forth.
Yeah. You're going to be seen more by the community
Yeah. So
as
that's
Mars
cool.
moves into that area. And what supports that and what is the result of that? That's where we will look at what houses Mars actually rules in the chart.
Mhm.
So that's going to bring up issues around your communication, third house, and how you navigate the boundaries and issues of others, how you engage with others, how you set boundaries with others. So, how probably it's interesting to think about this is as you've been working on understanding what your path forward is in your career, a lot of what has probably come up is questioning how you communicate and what kind of boundaries you have within your career.
Yeah.
What boundaries you have with others and how you communicate those boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, I was definitely going to say you can certainly relate both of these two areas of life to your profession, whatever you do. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't matter if you're staying at home and raising kids and that's your profession, or you're completely out in the world. No matter what, you're going to be dealing with issues of like needing to set boundaries around other people's feelings and values and, you know, the way they want to kind of interact. And then your ability to communicate and work with those topics. I mean, no matter what, I mean, within anything that you're doing, that you're showing up in public, these are very important skills. And you can kind of see, they give you a little bit of a barometer, like how well you've dealt with this rewriting the story and are ready to bring it into groups over the course of the next few months. It's going to kind of show you, you know, like if your communication is good, you know, you're going to get you're going to have clarity around your interactions with people, you know, and same with you're just going to have this more clear understanding.
Right.
If you haven't really done that work, you might still just feel confused and angry. You know, it's a little bit of an interesting barometer. So
yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, let's see here. I'm going to pause us for one moment, and we're going to go back to the charts we were looking at.
That's right.
Okay, so now we are going to move on to those of you with Libra rising. And this puts the Mars retrograde that we've been dealing with in the 9th house. So now that all the planets are moving direct, that planet is really holding space and telling us a story of what we have re-navigated. Boy, I just articulated that in such a bizarre manner. But if you've got Libra rising, think about what is going on in terms of your worldview, in terms of education, travel, however it is that your mind opens. That's what the 9th house is about. And over these months, you've been really learning something new about your worldview. You've been telling yourself a new story about what's true, what your worldview is. So over the next couple of months, when Mars moves out of that area and all the planets are moving direct supporting us, that Mars, that new worldview that you now have, is being brought into your career.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I keep thinking, I read something recently about the 9th house and its connection to critical thinking. You know, so the idea that you take what you've learned and all these things, and then you work with it in your own unique way, you know, to really take a step back and look at like what's true here, what's real here. And there's something very, I don't know, this evaluating of like Mars kind of hovering in retrograde in this 9th house, of like really evaluating like, how do you tell what truth is, you know, and questioning the things that you follow and believe. I think that's a really important part of this.
Oh, especially in today's world.
Oh my God. Yeah. When it's just, you know, where truth and fiction are just completely blurred together, and it's a very confusing time. And unfortunately, not going to get any clearer anytime soon with Saturn going into Pisces. But anyway, side note. But so those of you with Libra rising, like this, you know, this is some way that you're going to be able to incorporate this new way of thinking into your career. That's what's moving forward. And then we also put on here what Mars rules, which is Scorpio and Aries. And so we put those on here because those are sort of like places where you can see the results of your action. They play a little bit of a supporting story. And so what you're going to see is in your 7th house of relationship, there's going to be an impact there. You know, this new way of thinking for yourself is going to show up in your one-on-one interactions with people. And it might be the people may respect you more for it. Other people might get mad. But what matters is that you being connected to yourself and that you're standing up for yourself. And that's what's important. And tied in with that is the 2nd house of how you value yourself. And this sometimes shows up in topics that have to do with money and so on as well. But nonetheless, this is you kind of going, all right, I've thought for myself more on this, and I'm going to stand up for myself in these one-on-one relationships, and I'm going to have this, you know, more secure foundation of how I support my own self-worth. So you're going to be pretty unshakable in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's really it's really interesting how that kind of, you can just see the story of it. It's like you've done all this critical thinking, you've got a new view, you're bringing that new view into the public in some way, and that feels good. It supports your self-worth, and it supports your direct actions in relationship because you know how to respond.
Mhm.
You've got a more clarity, possibly before Mars was doing its retrograde, you may have been really unclear about certain areas of your understanding of the world. So you were on kind of shaky grounds with other people. So this really clarifies things, supports your direct relationships, and supports your world, your self-worth.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And with, those of you with Libra rising too, like you have a premium on having things feel balanced and harmonious to a degree. So this is interesting work for you because you've had to
Right.
kind of dig into those maybe more conflicted or heated corners that maybe aren't quite as comfortable, just because
Yeah.
your overall life direction is about achieving this kind of balance.
Right.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So
Yeah.
think about
Interesting.
that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Scorpio rising. If you've got Scorpio rising, over these past months, while Mars was retrograde, it was doing its retrograde in your 8th house. So now that everything's moving forward, you are really supported in thinking about that. Think about, what story have you rewritten for yourself about how you navigate other people's issues, other people's baggage, other people's values, how you navigate that area. That's what you've really been working on. So over the coming months, as all the planets are direct, Mars will be moving into your 9th house, bringing your understanding of how to navigate other people's values into your own worldview. That's an interesting movement, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely moving out of a more internal space and like kind of having to go within and
Right.
understand more about yourself and like because you're backed up against the context of other people's values and stuff. So
Right.
you kind of have to go, well, where do I fit? There's a little bit of that sort of work with the Mars retrograde.
You
Uh,
probably had to work with boundaries a lot.
yeah, like it's
Yeah.
really, and it's funny because we talk about boundaries a lot, but there's a lot of stuff like boundaries are a delicate balance, so where you're not throwing up walls with other people, but you're also not just letting anybody come tromping into your sovereignty. There's something
Right.
about that. But whatever you've learned here is incredibly valuable because the 9th house is a wonderful place of where you now get to share your wisdom, where you now
Right.
kind of say, hey, here's my worldview, and I've really done some work to figure out how to perhaps incorporate other people. You might have developed more empathy for other people's stuff in this time period. I
Yeah.
mean, it just depends what kind of work you've been doing, but it's a
Right.
really nice opportunity to be like, hey, this is what I've learned,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna share.
And bring it out into the world. And
Mhm.
the result of this process comes into your personality and your day-to-day routines of self-care. That's kind of, as you've been rewriting that story, you have a clearer understanding of how you navigate others, how boundaries, all of those things, and you're bringing that understanding into your worldview. It really supports your ability to support yourself and your health care, your self-care.
Yeah,
It's
nice.
very personal. Ultimately, it's very, very personal for you.
Yeah.
What you've learned and how you bring it forward is incredibly personal.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that sixth house is such an interesting place. I mean, with Aries there, it's like you are somebody who needs to figure out how to burn off some energy one way or another. Just it's just something that you've got to do to keep yourself healthy. So it's interesting to think about what have you learned. What adjustments are you making in this very adjustable area of your life? Because this is all these
Mhm.
little routines that you can make little tweaks to, and it doesn't have to be big stuff.
Right.
But it's worth noting why you've been in that Mars retrograde period. And then, like you said, like Scorpio rising, I mean, this is your whole kind of being. The first house is the most powerful house, an angular house where people are going to really kind of get their first impression of you.
Yeah.
To a Scorpio, you kind of show up with some mystery, right? Like
Right.
some kind of hidden, people aren't quite sure what to make of you when you first show up. And so seeing how this is adjusted, now you might be showing up as more of perhaps a slightly more grounded person with how you've adjusted your routines, and maybe someone to really pay attention to, maybe rather than being someone that people might be a little bit leery of, you know.
It's so interesting that, Mars is rulership of both Aries and Scorpio, and them being so different, but they both have that edge. Mars is so direct and outward, and Scorpio is so inward, but they both have that edge.
Yeah, they're both combative in their own ways, but with Scorpio is a little more internal battles. And with Scorpio rising, it's kind of like your own internal battles, or kind of, people get a weird view of them because it's that first house. So it's kind of an interesting, it's a funny place for it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So I think that covers Scorpio rising. And now let's move on to those of you with Sagittarius rising. So what do you think about this placement, Jennie? I'm going to turn it right over to you.
I think this really shows you, so Mars being retrograde from, October till January. I mean, this is a time to kind of reevaluate your role in your relationships, your one-on-one partnerships. And again, this could be your marriage, but it doesn't have to be your marriage. It can be other one-on-one situations, just as a reminder, those intimate relationships. So whatever work that you've been doing, to kind of look at this, rewrite this narrative about who you are as a partner, it's soon going to go into that 8th house. So it's going to take you, I always think of this as the deeper chapter of the 7th house. When you're talking about relationships, where now you're going to kind of test that out, because now you're going to get into the harder to navigate places, the hidden, it's like the iceberg behind the level of the water, where you bump into each other's baggage. So you're bumping into the baggage of the partner, or the other person you're talking about. So the degree to which you've been able to successfully reevaluate, get some clarity, and change your role is going to really show up in this next stage, when things get deeper and things get real in the 8th house. So
and the 8th house, it's where we bump into other people's baggage. I always want to remind myself too that it's also shared. It's like shared resources. It's other people's resources, but it's also where you share resources. And perhaps those of you with Sagittarius rising, during the time of Mars retrograde, you were really rewriting that narrative about who you are in partnership, what your relationship is about. And now you're ready to go deeper into sharing resources together, or with all the planets moving direct and supporting that movement, you might really be ready to take on a much closer connection with that partner. And ultimately, the movement here, we've got marked on here the houses that are ruled by Mars, the 5th and the 12th. So I think of that as, okay, as you've rewritten that story of your relationship, you're bringing that energy into the deeper levels of partnership. And where is that the result of that? And where is what's been supporting you? What areas of life support that motion? Your creativity. And your unconscious, behind the scenes, possibly spiritual life as well would be supportive of that process. Possibly children as well with that 5th house. That would be appropriate.
I was just thinking that this is a great, I was having a conversation with a friend recently. This has made me think of dancing, like ecstatic dance, like the type of dancing that brings you into that kind of shamanic space of the 12th house. And then the 5th house, the creativity, the moving of your body, the burning off
the play.
Like the play, really the high energy movement is what I see with Aries in the 5th house here. And that's your way of something that just brings you joy, and allows you to, it kind of unleashes the gates of generosity. Like when you express yourself in this way, it lets you do all those things. Like,
and it could really bring in intense, deep, amazing levels of sexual connection as well.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
think about that, the work you've done in the relationship, moving into that 8th house, supporting the 12th and the 5th. Yeah, it could be ecstatic dance or ecstatic sexual connection.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. Yeah, because that 12th house piece too,
that's
playing
lovely.
into it, that's such an internal, where you really work with some subconscious things. And I've been reading some Carl Jung lately too, and it's that archetypal consciousness, so it's beyond just the personal human experience.
Right.
So it's something that connects to this much larger picture, more collective unconscious picture. Which I think is fascinating. So you may be acting things out that are from places that you're not even sure of, like old lineages and ancestry and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Cool.
That's beautiful. I love that. Okay. Enjoy that, all of you with Sagittarius
Yes,
rising.
do enjoy it.
Yeah, do enjoy it. So now we're going to move on to those of you with Capricorn rising. And this puts Mars, having been doing its retrograde, in your 6th house. So you've been rewriting some narrative about how you care for your body, how just your day-to-day routines of life, your exercise routines, your spiritual routines, your healthcare routines, all of those things you've been really re-navigating that and writing a new story. So as this retrograde free time goes on, that planet is going to be moving, that Mars is going to be moving into your 7th. So how you've changed your routines now moves into really impacting your relationship. How do you think about that, Jennie?
I think, the things you're saying are great. I think it's interesting to think about the Mars retrograde in the 6th house as some way you've had to rewrite the narrative about what you do for your routines, like what way you take care of yourself. Like there may have been some things that you needed to, Mars refers to the separating factor. So there might've been things you needed to cut out. There's some possibility around that. Some way you've altered your diet, you've altered like your the way that you do those daily practices that keep you balanced, and sometimes those are really hard to let go of. So it depends what your story is around that, but the degree to which you've worked through that, it's going to allow you to show up in these partnerships in a new way. As you said, like it's kind of like fixing your foundation a little bit. Your self-care routines allow you to kind of be more present in the relationship, because this reminds me of having experience of having a friend come over, but you didn't get to do your self-care, so you're agitated and you're not present for the friend. It's kind of like that.
I love that. That's
that's
a great way to think about it. Yeah.
So doing the self-care so you can show up in the partnership and feel totally rock solid. And then in the meantime, we have this kind of this sub-narrative of the places that Mars rules, which Mars rules Aries and Scorpio. So you have this sub-story about the 4th house, and I think this kind of enhances that idea of like the foundation beneath your feet being more solid, who you show up as in your family life. That's the 4th house. And your personality integration piece, like just so coming in with that nice grounded, that maybe not grounded, but confident thing. And then it's going to impact your groups as well, because you've got Scorpio up there in the 11th house. Your
community. So the work you've done on routines, supporting your intimate partnerships, and the result of that is your home is more solid and stable, or it's more energized by that Mars, and your community is also more energized by that Mars.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is going to have quite a global impact for those of you Capricorn rising. This whole planet's direct time. So these are to your advantage.
Okay. Well, thank you. So let's go on then to those of you who have Aquarius rising. If you've got Aquarius rising, now that all the planets are direct, let's slow down a minute and look at Mars. During the period of time from the end of October until January, I don't remember the exact date, but Mars was retrograde there in your 5th house. This has been a time where you've really been working hard to understand your own creativity, how you give love to others, probably rewriting the narrative of how you do that, what your creativity is, how you function in that area, in that way. And over the coming months, while all the planets are direct, Mars will be moving out of that house and into the 6th. So in some manner, you've rewritten your creative life, and now you're taking that energy into your day-to-day routines.
Nice.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I was thinking when you're talking like the 5th house also refers to risk taking. And so I thought about, risk taking with those sort of creative pursuits. That maybe during this Mars retrograde period, you've had an opportunity to overcome a fear that you have and enabled yourself
I
to
like
take
that.
more risks.
Uh-huh.
Because it really kind of brings in that inner part of Mars, which Mars may not love being there, but nonetheless, it might give you an opportunity to overcome fear. Because sometimes Mars's response to fear is just to keep going, keep going, keep going, and it didn't do that. So it's possible that you had an opportunity to really work at that, and that would really show up in your 6th house of routines, as maybe you're doing something new. I mean, maybe you learned how to snowboard in that time, and now you're snowboarding, like
Right.
which is kind of like a adrenaline sport, but that kind of energy of like that willingness to grapple with something that held you back before, and then now it's like a slingshot where you're just going to let it move forwards, and it's going to go into your daily routines.
Right.
So,
or maybe you rewrote your creativity in some way, and now you're, listing your creative projects on Etsy.
yeah,
and,
I mean,
that brings in the rulership of Mars, of the 3rd house and the 10th house. So something about this rewritten story, bringing it into the routines, results in a change and support in terms of your career and in terms of your communication.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like this together.
So
This
maybe you're, you talked about snowboarding. Maybe you're snowboarding and you're skipping out on work because you're snowboarding, and you have to communicate in a new way with your boss about why you. Sorry, I'm going off on a little tangent.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say I like how this works together, because I do think that if you're in a profession that you really are excited about, and I know that's not everybody, so that's okay. But this is an opportunity to really employ that creative flow into that profession. Or maybe it's something you haven't been that excited about, but now you have a new window of a new way to incorporate creative function. And perhaps the meaning of the Aries on the 3rd house is like how to ask for what you want at work, kind of be like, you want me to stick around? I know people are short staffed. Do you mind if I take on the can I put up the creative menu every day, because that will keep me more engaged with the job? I mean, it could be something in those terms too, but something that affects you over the course of several months.
Yeah. That's awesome. I like that. Okay. So with all of that being said, let's move on to those of you with Pisces rising. So if you've got Pisces rising, now that all the planets are moving direct, we're going to think just for a minute about the most recent Mars retrograde, because that one has been so prominent over the last few months. So during this period of time, since October, you've been really working and rewriting that story of home, family, whatever that means to you. It could be stuff about family members. It could be about your house itself that you live in. But there's some way that area of life has really needed a reworking. So over the next few months, that Mars is going to be continuing through your 4th house and into your 5th. So whatever story you're have been rewriting about your home and family, you're going to be bringing that into the area of creativity.
Yeah. I like to think about it. If you have children, the 5th house refers to children, or you have children in your life, even if they're not your own. This is a nice kind of way of that work that you've done to kind of, restructure or reevaluate who you are in family life. Now it's giving you an opportunity I don't know, kind of release into more of a flow and fun place, where
Yeah.
you get to be more creative and less kind of stern. And I don't know, I think of the Mars, they're ruminating on your family role, and now it's going the other way. So
Right.
you're getting the fruits of your labor, and now it's time
Right.
to be able to release that energy into
Right.
these more fun relationships.
Yeah, so the work that you've done in these past months around your home and family now can come out in over the next few months, come out in the relationships with children or your own creativity. Maybe you did some work on your house to make space for creativity. That's another thing that you might want to or be able to do over the next few months as well.
That's a good thought.
Yeah,
I like that.
creating space for creativity, creating space for connecting with your kids in a new way too.
Yeah, I like what you said about the house, because that could be the irritation of dealing with, builders and so on, like renovating a space and
Yeah.
being like, oh man, and having to do things differently. And then now they're gone. You're out of your space, and now you get the fruits of the labor. You get the sweet little studio that you
Right.
needed, and
Right.
the kitchen for your creative cooking projects, and
Right.
etc. That's
Yeah.
a good way to think about it. I
Yeah.
like
Yeah. So
Mhm.
then the results, the supporting areas and the result area are the houses that Mars rules. And that is the second house of self-worth and resources, and the ninth house of your worldview.
Mhm.
So, as you've rewritten the story about your family and home, you have how do we want to think about this? How is that changing your self-worth, your worldview?
Yeah. Well, I think if you've kind
Ah,
of reevaluated your role in the family, that might also, I mean, it could be to tie into kind of the story we were painting the picture of before. It could be a little bit like, you've been missing your artistic piece in your family, and you've just expected to, let's say, be mom. And now you're going, I need to do my creative pursuits. So this is how I'm valuing myself. And now I
right.
have my studio, and then as you do that, you are also sharing the wisdom of how to do something like that, how to recognize something that's really important to you and then stand up for it, and then teach, which is that ninth house. Hey, this
Right.
is what you do to move
Right.
something really important forwards that is part of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is one thought.
Yeah, and that certainly will increase and support your second house of self-worth.
Mhm.
And possibly, depending on what you're doing with those creative projects, it might increase your resources in that second house as well.
Yeah, could have a money impact. Exactly.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So I
Huh.
think that's an interesting thing. There's probably a few different ways you could go with that ninth house direction, tying in with this too. But yeah.
Yeah, an increase in just, I mean, it could be you had to rewrite a lot of the story of your family in order to show up with your own authentic worldview, rather than, trying to do what other people thought you were supposed to. I guess the cat wanted to join me for the last moments of the
So
video,
handsome.
isn't he?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that
Cool.
wraps us up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. All right.
Then I'm going to stop sharing this, and we are going to say thank you, everyone. And
Yes.
we will do another video soon. Next time you can bring your
Yeah.
cat as well.
Do think of this time period from January 23rd to April 21st with all planets direct, and just take note of what you observe, and shoot us an email in a couple
Yeah.
months.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
All right.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And thank you, Jennie.
Thanks, Laurie. Bye.
Bye.